people understand that there's an answer, there's a way. We the people have to say. So send the orders to prepare, that we the people do declare. Send the good news, send the word. We the people will be heard. We the people.
Welcome to DN News in Review. I'm your host, Lou Ismay. Things in the news, drones, warfare, banking, worldwide things, anniversary. We'll start. A drone memo was ordered to be released, and it was heavily redacted. It's a justification for our country and our president specifically to authorize the killings of people, Americans, and others in warfare. We don't know the contents, because it's been redacted, blacked out, line after line. Someday we'll know what the real contents are. But in the meantime, the question still is before us. By what authorization do we kill American citizens elsewhere in the world? Does that right also apply to non-U.S. citizens? What are the restrictions, if any? Will have to be resolved, especially since Noam Chomsky on the program Alternative Radio on WAMC very recently pointed out that in a poll taken worldwide, the United States of America came out number one as the greatest terrorist threat to the world. Israel came in second. So here's an instant where we are the number one. So drones and other actions that we've taken come into question. We have a vision of ourselves that we're great, we promote democracy, we have justice and fairness, and perhaps we ought to examine ourselves to see how we hold up in terms of the world. We talk from time to time about the justice or the injustice of treating women the way we do in our country in economic terms, in career terms, how we take care of our children compared to how children are taken care of in other parts of the world, especially the Western world, the industrialized world. Well, this is something to think about, isn't it? Well, the drones are the targets so far, are the targets identified by the CIA, the Department of Defense, and other intelligence agencies. The people who review those recommendations are the leaders of those very organizations. There apparently is no third-party oversight, an independent party of some sort, an agency perhaps, a commission perhaps, and should we have that? Something interesting has happened affecting the Palestinians and the Israelis. The Presbyterian Church, USA, has voted to divest from 3 corporations that are aiding the Israeli government in its occupation and harassment of the Palestinians. Part of this harassment recently is due to the fact that Hamas and the Palestinian organization have merged. And the Israeli Prime Minister indicates that the Hamas is the dangerous one and we should divest ourselves from the Hamas. However, these 3 organizations that help, Caterpillar Tractor, bulldozers with machine guns mounted, bulldozers that are apparently electrified, can wipe out a building in a few seconds. No details, but that's the way it seems in the information that we have. The next one is Motorola. What does Motorola do? It produces fuses that are used in the bombs that are used in Palestine. And they produce the surveillance equipment that's used. And the third, Hewlett-Packard. What does Hewlett-Packard do? It produces these devices, that biometric devices that are used as scanners at border crossings, recognizing faces, features, whatever the system is designed to do. It's part of the surveillance, but very specifically with the biometrics. The first time that this has happened to Israel, and that country has been fighting this for some time now, hoping it would not happen, working toward its not happening. Divestment was brought to the South African government to the point where it realized that the world really didn't like what was going on. Had to change. It has an economic impact. It's devastating to the economy. So the religious groups have been working toward peace in that part of the world for many years. Occupation is going on now, for 4 decades? Thereabouts. Here's one instance where a Christian denomination has decided finally to take action when nothing else has worked. And one example of the destruction caused by use of those bulldozers, in May 19th, 1,500 to 2,000 fruit trees were uprooted, destroyed, supposedly as a lesson to the Palestinians. It takes many years to grow olive trees, an important crop in other parts of the world, and in here too for olive oil and things. Uprooted. Punishment. And with the disappearance of, or unaccountability, don't know where they are, what happened to them, 3 young Israeli youth, causing the Israeli government to punish the Palestinian people. There have been some killings, many arrests, much harassment. You know, it could be sort of like a false flag. Maybe those young people are somewhere. They haven't disappeared. They haven't been kidnapped. It's not impossible to have some sort of a trick. But nevertheless, the process has begun to help the Israeli government understand that the world cares about what it does. The United Nations resolution several years ago that human beings have the right to water. It's a human right. But in Detroit, Michigan, there seems to be another idea regarding the rights to have water. About 3,000 people per week are having their water supply, their tap water, shut down because of the inability to pay the water bills. Any bills of more than $150 unpaid are subject to the shutdown. Now, there's about a 40% poverty rate in that city. And there's a very, very large Afro-American community that is trying neighborhood by neighborhood to rebuild, to renew people who have faith in the community in which they live. Now this comes along. Allegedly, there's a $5 billion deficit in the water district, in its budget. Well, some people with children, and by the way, about 2/3 of the community of that 40% in poverty are households with children. Now, if that household is in some way involved with the welfare agency and the water is shut off, then the children are taken and put into foster care. The people, the foster care parents, earn more money than the birth mother can. So if family is destroyed, how will the children fare? And should the community find some way some way to deal with the situation so that life can return, in a sense, to the people who do need water and should have it. There seems to be a movement underway to privatize the system. Now, we've seen in Bolivia where the country water supply was privatized, and what did people do? The only thing they could do, they marched in the street, civil disobedience, it wasn't silent, it was a boisterous revolution in a sense. Revolution, a change. Insurgency is violence. Civil disobedience, in a sense, is a quiet revolution. Bring about the change. The government had to rethink its policy. Water is back to the Bolivians, and no outlandish, outrageous fees charged for something that all human beings as a matter of fact, all living things in some way need. We can debate some of the fine points of that, but basically that's the way it is. Now, WikiLeaks has recently disclosed, and this is all on Democracy Now!, and you can Google it, democracynow.org, and you can read these reports yourself. The banking industry is finding a way that it can operate under a trade and services agreement to have freewheeling over the economic system, the banking system. Now, bankers are frequently these years called banksters. That's the way the report was presented. A plan that only bankers will love. So if this goes through, then there will be no control over the worldwide banking system, on which we all depend whether we want to or not. What shall we do? What do we care about? What is important? And do we have a broad enough world view of some of these issues? They may sound small to those who aren't interested, but all of these issues are connected in some way. Need to think about that. Patrick Cockburn reported recently that Baghdad is a frightened city. No one knows quite what to do. No one knows when something that might happen in terms of the ISI organization coming in. Why did this situation start? Well, it started years ago. It started with the United States government wanting Maliki, the prime minister, to be prime minister. He's a Shiite. When he took office, he fired the Sunnis. That's the immediate start of this. But it started years before that. It started in 2003, when worldwide opposition to the war in Iraq was expressed all over the world. Thousands of people in this country marching. People elsewhere in the world marching, expressing their displeasure with the United States of America, the government. That particular event, the protest against going to war, was expressed in New York City with fear on the part of the police. Along the line of march, one saw police with many of these plastic, what's now used as handcuffs, hanging from the belt. And the police, in its fashion, cut the parade off into sections. It seemed that it was one block at a time cut off from the other block. People not allowed to cross the police line, even though there were members of the family, children trying to get back to their parents, or parents trying to get to their children. Fear. Well, no one knew what to do, except that the people knew they were not going to be violent, were not going to engage in any kind of destructive actions at all. So Baghdad is in a situation And in order to be fair, in order to spread the information wide, it actually began with our invasion. And when we took control of that country, Paul Bremer, who was in charge of the coalition, did two things right away. Two of the worst steps possible. And he apparently was responsible to Rumsfeld. Anyway, what he did, he disbanded the Iraqi army. Many of its career people are Sunnis. So right away, the United States of America was directly responsible for the situation that now exists, the terror, the massacres. And the second thing was to destroy the Ba'athist Party. The army was willing to work with NATO, the coalition, to keep law and order. And the Ba'athists were just eliminated from their role in the country. So, the blame for this fiasco, according to the people who recently spoke of it on Democracy Now!, is based entirely on George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, and Donald Rumsfeld, the three names that most frequently appear. Mr. Obama is being labeled a weak president, allowing our troops to be withdrawn from Iraq in 2011. He's accused of malfeasance, or whatever words are used, and we forget the truth. You and I sometimes have very short memories. The person who signed the agreement to withdraw from Iraq, our military, was George W. Bush. We need to know that, don't we? It isn't always pleasant to know that sometimes we don't do well in the world, but only by knowing the truth, only by realizing it in a non-partisan way, if we can get to that point, so that we can make some changes in our focus in the world, so that we can help, if we really want to make the world a little bit better, a great deal less violent, a situation in which human beings can thrive. Recently, on the alternative radio program that we referred to just a few moments ago, Noam Chomsky also pointed out that governments function seemingly without regard to the population. Our government paying more attention to friendly dictators and their desires than to the effects on population, including our own. We need to keep in mind, and perhaps we can all agree on this, that at any instant it is possible, through some malfunction, carelessness, to literally destroy ourselves. It could happen. It nearly has happened several times in the past. Nuclear weapons need to be under control. In our country, with the guided missiles, it seems that the thinking sometimes about our foreign affairs, regarding our foreign affairs, that we have the idea that, well, if something goes wrong, we always have the missiles at our command. We can do what we want to. That sometimes seems to be the attitude. We have a pretty self-centered opinion of ourselves as the most important in the world. Are we aware that human beings are important? Living things? Beings? Do we treat human beings elsewhere in the world with dignity and respect? Or do we treat people like hordes? Now, that's not true of all of us. And it's certainly not true of the organizations that work on international levels to help alleviate the aches and pains and the hunger and the thirst of millions and millions of people elsewhere. But these are perhaps some things that we ought to consider. Journalism is under attack in Egypt. Journalism under attack. 3 eminent journalists from Al Jazeera in jail. Journalists are harassed in our country. Our White House wants journalists to give up the sources of their information. Traditionally, that was protected. Traditionally, we respected journalists. Didn't always like the fact that they exposed our sins and our corruptions, but nevertheless, they were respected. Journalists in Egypt, elsewhere, are killed, jailed. Keep that in mind. It's only with freedom of the press do we know what's going on. And it's only through whistleblowers do we know the truth behind the scenes. Is that something? In Iraq, the United States wants Maliki out. And who is being considered by the United States to take his place? Ahmed Chalabi, the man who got us into the fracas, the man who said there were weapons of mass destruction, the man who worked both sides of the issue. Pretty sly chap. Back as leader of Iraq? Well, he wasn't leader originally, but back in Iraq? What kind of leadership will that be? And who will benefit? The Central Park Five, who were accused falsely of raping seriously wounding a female jogger in Central Park about 25 years ago, have received a $40 million settlement, wrongful jailing, fueled by race-baiting police abuse, coerced, frightened, believing if they confessed they would be safe, they would not be in jail. Police sometimes anxious to get a conviction. It's not unusual for these 5 men, Antron McRae, Kevin Richardson, Raymond Santana, Corey Wise, and Yusuf Salam. Not a great deal of money, but at least it's something. Paul Elijah, the great man, speaks about things in WAMC, had something to say recently regarding automobile ads, advertising. The automobiles, the new ones, showing in all sorts of fancy tricks, spinning, racing, climbing, doing all sorts of things that automobiles weren't really designed to do. And he's making the connection between the ads and the accidents that happen, especially involving youth, young people. We need to keep in mind that according to science, our brains are not fully developed until we're somewhere closer to 26 years old, 24, 26, depends on what we read. Not developed enough so that we know the effects of what we do. We do things, but we don't have the ability to think of what will happen after we do that, whatever it is. So it's an interesting thing, his observation. We can add something to that observation on 2 instances recently. Observed people passing on a hill, passing another car on the hill at the top of the hill. An invitation, certainly, to catastrophe. And we've observed many times I-90, 787, 146, elsewhere, automobiles with no headlights driving after dusk well into the area where it's very difficult to see. Dark. No headlights. No running lights. Happens early in the morning too, but most often at night, at dusk, after sunset. The law used to, may still, allow farmers and people who work to get 30 minutes of driving before sunrise and after sunset. But the observations are of this kind of driving well after the 30 minutes would be over. Is that going to be causing some problems? And one more bit of news before we go to see some things, look at some things. Phyllis Venus, a senior fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies, spoke at length on Democracy Now! She wrote an article Don't go back to Iraq. 5 steps the U.S. can take without going back to war. Diplomacy, and she emphasized. The question is, one of the questions, should Obama go to Tehran and talk? After all, we are talking with the Iranians. We're discussing the situation regarding nuclear proliferation. Iran signed the international treaty trying to get Iran to change its policy of creating radioactive material. Iran considered by the people of surrounding countries that they consider Iran a safe and sensible neighbor. The leaders of the countries surrounding Iran in the neighborhood feel otherwise, but the people don't feel the fear that the leaders seem to express. Anyway, the idea would be, as long as we're speaking with the Iranians anyway, can we open up the subject of working to help stabilize Iraq? After all, both the United States and Iran have vested interests. They have in the past and can again work together. Possible. Should we take the possibility? The New York Times recently had an interesting article. We'll take a quick look at it. In the science section, a sunken kingdom reemerges. Changing climate is revealing clues about early humans and how weather affected them. And in the changing scene in Wales, the water, this is a forest that once existed. And archaeologists are finding evidences of occupation. It's about 5,000 years ago, this submerged forest in Borth in Wales is not new, first flooded some 5,000 years ago. So our predecessors have experienced climate change. Now here's where the forest was discovered. This is Great Britain. This is Wales, Liverpool, Borth, this area around Cardigan Bay. There's Swansea, and there's Cardiff Giant at Cooperstown at the Historical Museum, Farmers Museum. Anyway, this is the area that's under investigation, and the British government is encouraging archaeologists and people who walk dogs to look for other evidence, getting many more eyes to see where these people lived. You know, it's in the North Sea that there's a civilization known as Atlantis once was supposed to have existed. It may turn out that that's true. Well, this is a start. And one other thing in the New York Times that's of really interest is this one, if you excuse the rustling of the newspapers here. Here's a man from Sweden who is searching for answers in very old DNA. And there's a skull, a reconstructed Neanderthal skull. And he's been working with DNA. And he indicates that approximately 2% of us, 1 to 2% of us, have Neanderthal DNA in us. If our heritage is from Europe, that part of the world. DNA is not found in Africa because the Neanderthal didn't go there. But apparently wherever the Neanderthal were, there is some evidence that we have in our bodies that DNA. Interesting, isn't it? From now on, maybe we should think carefully about those people about whom we make fun, which used to be the case with Neanderthals. Look at something else, some cartoons quickly. Here's one. Ken Bo, Bergdahl. We were rescued after spending 5 years in captivity. You can at least come home to the USA. Where will he be eligible for Veterans Administration health care? From one waiting on the waiting list. Interesting question, but Bergdahl is apparently in the rehab now. Here's another one. Redskins. U.S. Patent Office. We'll see how that works out in the long run. Don't vaccinate my kids. Our support is spreading. Spreading for sure. Measles are nothing to fool with. Here's another one. Wizard of Id. Peasants. Merchants. Vassals. Lords. Kings. Lobbyists. We have many, many, many lobbyists in this world of ours. Current issue of National Geographic. Is anybody out there, life beyond Earth? That's a major story. But this is also a major story, one of what will be a series of 8 stories. Can Africa's fertile farmland feed the planet? Oh, we reported some years back that countries and corporations were buying up land, thousands, millions of acres in total, to feed their own people in their own countries in years to come, also feeding others. Why big corporations are grabbing up land, the next breadbasket. And they're grabbing up land, especially in Africa. But the thing about which we want to show just before it's just to keep in mind. First of all, this is a photograph of food, fruit. And where do they come from? Well, there are about 60 fruits in that photograph. And this is perhaps important for us. These lines converge in New York City. And those numbers are the numbers of the fruit. This, for example, is the photograph now in a different form. And those numbers indicate the fruits. Melons, bananas, and all sorts of fruit. And they come from China, South Korea, Vietnam. And they come by truck, or by plane, or by boat. Now, They originate in 32 international sources and 28 domestic ones. And this chart, and you might look it up for yourself, indicates the method of transportation. The numbers connect to the chart. And look, we get things from Argentina and Chile and Peru and Brazil. We get things here from South Africa and from Europe. Now, we don't get sources from the rest of Africa, but it could be someday that we will. It all depends. We're soon going to have 50 billion people, 50 billion mouths to feed, 50 billion human beings. The earth was not designed to feed that many people, but through modern agriculture, combination of modern large-scale agriculture and a vast multitude of small farmers, we may be able to do it. That's something about which we want to think. This is about the 50th anniversary of something that happened in Laos. And there was a discussion about this. Now, Burma, Thailand, Vietnam, this was North Vietnam, and this was South Vietnam. There's Cambodia, and this is Laos. This little narrow country here. And it was bombed. It was bombed for about 9 consecutive years. A total of 2 million tons of explosives. A great deal of that in cluster bombs. There was a trail from North Vietnam, down through Laos to South Korea, the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And the United States determined to interdict that trail. The bombs, the equivalent of 1 airplane load of bombs every 8 minutes, day and night, continuous, without let up. The effects of what we did is what the report is about. People have thousands killed, injured, children losing arms, legs, hands, some being destroyed. People need to work the land. In case of a boy digging bamboo shoots for soup for his family, losing his left limb. As an adult, he spoke about that incident. What are we doing as a nation? Do we have any plan at all? Do we? Of helping people when we invade their country? When we destroy their lives for generations? There's still ordnance, and it's called ordnance and explosives, left over from World War I. There are people who devote their lives as to their career, their job, to find the ordnance and make it safe, destroy it. In the process, many of them lose their lives. Princess Di was interested in some of these things, mines. Others interested in cluster bombs. What shall we do? Do we have any responsibility? Can we, psychologists, psychiatrists, people with wisdom. We can do anything we envision. The story of successful men and women in the world, in all walks of life, succeed because they have a vision. They can picture something. They know something. And they work for that and they succeed. What about envisioning peace? What about envisioning an economic system that does not destroy people? Not one with a free enterprise to do what we want to do without any regard for the effects of what we do. Can we envision that? Can we envision corporations having an ethic, a moral ethic? How does the work that the corporation does affect others? Is it beneficial or is it destructive? What about envisioning peace? What about treating Earth as if it was a garden instead of destroying it by scavenging it? Well, we need minerals, perhaps. Doesn't seem to be much question about that. But do we have to, the usual thing is, well, we don't, it's too expensive. We can't do it. Corporations, important ones, arguing they cannot afford to stop air pollution. It's competitive. Well, the Supreme Court recently ruled that the Environmental Protection Agency can indeed control the emissions of toxic substances from some of the corporations' use of fossil fuel in our country. Just very recently. Now, there'll be some problems. But perhaps in that respect, we're on our way. We need to remember that there are hundreds, thousands of scientists throughout the world that have concluded from these various little bits of research, seem unimportant, but they turn out to be very important, that man-made activities are rapidly accumulating and are causing the very rapid warming of the planet. It's not a condemnation, it's a reality. And we have to really think. Communities are taking steps to prevent further damage to their communities, predicted damage based on experience, floods, and so forth. They're starting to work together to alleviate and plan for the future. Are the governments following up? Well, in the Netherlands they do. Elsewhere in the world, the government here and there will take steps. The islands in the Indian Ocean, trying to find ways to keep the population from disappearing, making alternate plans in case there's a catastrophe like flooding. There are people in Bangladesh who are concerned. In this country, are we? When the ice melts, National Geographic had a map recently. Good deal of the East Coast going to be underwater. Can we work together? Now, in a sense, we're seeing a revival of communities. We see a revival of what people can do to solve a situation, whether it's gun violence in a community, whether it's food for the people who need food, whether it's help for the homeless. And by the way, we have well over 2,000 students in our part of the world that are homeless. They have no place to live. They're homeless, maybe living in automobiles. They're going to school, that's how we know. It's over 2,000 of them, Saratoga, Albany, Schenectady, Rensselaer, close in around Albany, Capital District. So, until we meet again, support the food banks, support the independent bookstores, the food pantries, support the organizations working with the homeless. Think about health care. Pay attention to what's going on. We want to thank Glenn Jarrett for his engineering. I've been your host, Lou Ismay. Pay attention. The independent bookstores, bakeries, candy shops, hardware stores, all of the companies and organizations and people who keep our communities going. Pay attention.
There's a way. We the people have to say. So send the orders to prepare, that we the people do declare. Send the good news, send the word. We the people will be heard. We the people everywhere. There's a message in the air, and it's moving across the land. And if you listen, you can hear it well, my friend.